Welcome to the November meeting of the ICA, and we'll get it started. It's 4:01. We had minutes that were completed by Jeffrey, reviewed by everyone, and any corrections that were noted have been made, so they are as they stand. Are there any additional corrections? If not, could I have a motion to accept them?
So moved.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any discussion? They already did that. Oh, well, it's a Groundhog Day. Jeffrey, would you please give us an update on the financial status?
Sure.
And then we'll just move right into your report on the audit as well.
Thank you. So our December 18th financial report, we had a total of 8 bills that we paid this month for regular operating expenses. Our starting balance at the beginning of the month was $53,796.80. Our ending balance at the end of the month was $44,531.05. We have year-to-date interest earnings of $6.81, so we're really racking in the interest there. But the good news on our finances is that when Mr. Engel arrives, he should be bringing with him our year 2 allocation from DCED. So our second year, even though we're deep into year 2, we are finally getting our year 2 allocation from the Commonwealth, and the check did arrive this week. And as soon as I get it from Mr. Engel, I will make sure it gets into our checking account. So that's good news that we're fully funded. As of now, that's a second year allocation also of $100,000. That was our in the MOU with DCED. That's what we agreed would be our multi-year allocation. Moving on to our annual audit. This is actually the audit for the previous state fiscal year. So this is the fiscal year that ended on May 30th. Of 2019, June 30th, we completed, so we only had very little operations between when the authority first started in February and ended in June, but we were required under the Act to complete an audit. Zielinski and Axelrod did complete the audit for us. We have the audit document. There were no findings or comments concerning how little we did in that first year. But we will file that with the Commonwealth, and then we're also required to...
Hello, thank you. I was expecting this.
We're also required to... Mark, can you share this with... We're also required to print a financial statement in the Pennsylvania Bulletin. It's required by the Act, and so Jeff is going to do that as well. Jeff Engel is going to arrange for the issuance of our financial statement in the Pennsylvania Bulletin as is required by state law. And that will complete our year 1. And of course, as I said, we're in the midst of year 2 right now. So things are moving along as expected. So that summarizes, unless anybody has any questions about our finances, it's pretty straightforward.
Any questions? Do we need to adopt it?
No, we don't. We've taken the position that we don't accept. We just report, and my report goes into the minutes.
Okay.
So,
And then those the audit documents will be
on our website.
and they'll be. Do we have to report them to the Commonwealth?
We do have to, by December 31st, we have to file them with the General Assembly, and we will be doing that.
And then you post something
On the Pennsylvania Bulletin.
Right.
We have to take out
And the
an
website.
ad and our website. They'll be on everything by the end of the month. So,
Great,
thank you.
thank you. And Kathy, I'm just going to share this with you.
Yep.
You don't get your own copy, we're sharing today.
I didn't bring enough copies.
I
sorry.
share one.
You share well, so do I. The next thing is the chair's report, and I'll keep it short because we have a lot on the agenda today. It's been a busy month. The budget was submitted less than a week after our last meeting, so I think we've been attending lots of meetings, trying to absorb lots of information. And we'll be talking about that a little later. we're cruising through. The agreement update, we have not finalized an agreement. The city has asked us to move that to discussions and hopefully final agreement to January. As many of you know from the news, there has been an incredible amount of work that consumed the time of the city solicitor. And so that's the reason why we haven't been able to get to that. But both attorneys are ready to move full speed ahead very soon. Is there anything else? Any questions on that? And the letter that the mayor shared with me via hand delivery is essentially asking us that the city submits the budget to the ICA because it is inconsistent in its numbers with the five-year financial plan, which will be updated, as we mentioned at last month's meeting, it'll be approved by June 30th. We will begin workshopping it at the end of April. So, and what I'm going to do is, because the next discussion on the agenda item is discussion of everything that's happened. And so I thought maybe if we just talked amongst ourselves about these items, and then we can say that we've accepted this and that we have responded to the mayor and the city.
If you like, I can give you what I believe to be an update, and the city representatives can jump in, Neil, if you feel I'm getting the information incorrect. But I believe the information that I have is that as of last night, the budget was approved by the city council. That's the first item that's on your list, the proposed 2020 operating and capital budget. Secondly, the second item on your bulleted list is the AMBAC rate sheet. My understanding is that council did approve the terms of the sheet. There is another step that actually has to go back to confirm that, but the council did vote to approve the rate sheet as was proposed by the city. The third item is the FOP collective bargaining agreement. My understanding is that has been approved in principle by the city council. A final document still needs to be drafted, but council has given their authorization to proceed.
Actually, you received the last item from FOP.
Okay, so that's
That will move forward.
That's been moved forward. And then the last issue is the intermunicipal agreement with the Borough of Stilton regarding sanitation, and that was approved also by council, if I'm correct.
And by the borough.
And by the Borough of Stilton, we're both approved. So all of those items have been reviewed and approved by the city council as we meet here today. And we know that those are items that the ICA has taken interest in, and we're going to discuss this evening.
And we, members of the board, were able to be at all the presentations from the original budget submission to the two workshops. And so we benefited immensely from what we heard, what we learned, as well as the handouts that were made available at each of the meetings, because specifically they addressed questions that City Council had asked the city, so we had benefit of all that information. And so this is just a discussion, so I might open it up for observations or comments, and if there are any, if we're in a I mean, certainly, I think that on the AMBAC side, if we talk about that, I know that the city negotiated a multiplier as far as what the city will get credited for versus what we pay down. And I think the debate right now is whether or not the city can actually get to 8 million, because that's the maximum that they will essentially carry the deal on. And it would be smart to take advantage of a 0.34 multiplier or something like that.
Sure, I think I could add, and once again, if anybody from the city wants to jump in, that we did review the AMBAC rate sheet, the group did, and I know that I provided you with some insight into the terms. And in general, what I received back from you was support for the concept of the deal, for the concept of the pay down of the AMBAC, as well as the mayor's long-term plan to try to address the remaining balance of debt that exists after this. I think it was a positive reaction in general. I know there was a question as to whether or not there was the possibility to make an additional upfront payment that was not included in the original rate sheet. I think that going back to the city's interpretation was that they were able to make this one-time lump sum payment based on the positive financial position of the city as it currently is, and that the thought was that to take advantage of that and try to pay down as much of the AMBAC outstanding debt and get value from this multiplier effect. So I think everybody was generally positive with that idea, and to try to move this deal forward and then continue to work with the mayor on whatever potential outstanding debt service is left. Because obviously, if the ICA and the city have agreed that the time has come to try to rehabilitate the creditworthiness of the city of Harrisburg and move forward, not only with sound financial policies, but also the ability to re-enter the marketplace and use debt to fund worthwhile projects going forward. So I think everybody was sort of on the same page, and I know that the group was appreciative of the mayor's efforts to try to come up with a good, sound idea for the city with respect to the AMBAC outstanding debt. So I don't know if that summarizes your...
Well summarized.
Okay, good. If you want, I could summarize some of the other findings on the other issues.
Now a good time to butt in with a question on
Yes, this is exactly the time. It's on the, please butt in.
In order.
Yes.
On the remaining debt for that liability, is the interest rate being reduced
I don't know.
Yes.
Okay.
For a period of time.
for a period of time?
Okay.
So in addition to sort of credit being given, a multiplier of the credit on every dollar that's being prepaid early, the interest rate for a period of time is also being reduced on the remaining balance.
And there's a 3-year window for which there's some credit that's less each year if you pay what the max is.
So if more than $8 million is paid, even over the course of 3 years, there's no extra credit for it?
Okay.
But all of this is going to require an approval of the Commonwealth Court because they approved the original agreement that we're in.
Excellent.
And then this question would apply to all of them?
Sure.
But since this was not part of the initial 5-year plan as it was approved, do we then have to take any steps for statutory reasons to acknowledge that, or is that a step that we would have to take in the near term, or is that a step that would be skipped until
I believe the city has acknowledged that the transactions that I talked about would necessitate an update of the 5-year financial plan, which the mayor is planning to submit to us in the spring. So what we would have to acknowledge that obviously these transactions, whether you're supportive of them, yes, but then secondly, they would necessitate that the 5-year plan be updated to reflect these changes. And that's probably going to happen as a regular course of business between the ICA and the city. The city is going to take steps, make positive changes, and then reflect those in future updates to the 5-year fiscal plan as they move forward. I don't want to speak for you, but Mayor, if you'd like to.
The act, as I read it, says that if we adopt the budget, which is inconsistent with the 5-year plan, which the AMBAC settlement was not contemplated in the 5-year plan, we have to submit that budget to you for your review. That's what I've done in that transmittal letter. And you actually have 30 days to accept the budget as an amendment to the 5-year plan, or it's deemed approved. And then we move into the next cycle of developing the new 5-year plan,
Right.
which will take place in the first half of next year. So unless you have, if you have a concern with the budget, you might have to voice it, but if you don't have a concern with the budget, then it just acts as an amendment to the plan.
Jeff, going back to the Commonwealth
Sure.
Court approval, is that in the form of some sort of a petition?
It's an application, so the original ones were approved and executed on this particular set of settlement agreements. There's 3 of them from the receiver. It would be the same model here. Once it's reversed to a 3rd amended agreement, 2 parties would vote to approve it. The City Council, we are told, AMBAC would have to give its internal approvals, whatever form that takes. when it's signed, it would go then to the judge, we have a clause in it that it becomes effective upon approval by the court.
So you would have the opportunity, when you draft that application, to indicate that the ICA affirmatively approves of what you're doing with the
And you
AMP
would be served
payment.
with that too, you would just, as
Yes.
part of that. So
Because I think that's important for
Right.
Commonwealth Court to know.
there are other issues with the court, so the question if it goes by itself or with other things, I think that just depends on time.
Yeah. Thank you, Neil.
Okay, do you have any other questions that I can answer for you?
Do you want to keep going through the list?
Sure.
One more general question.
Okay,
Hold on.
no problem. We could talk for a moment about the collective bargaining agreement with the police union. That was pretty straightforward. I know that you all had an opportunity to review the proposed agreement, and I received nothing but positive comments from the authority. Everybody agreed that it was good to put this behind us, settle it, and they thought that the agreement was fair, and that the authority found it acceptable that the city had made those arrangements with the police union, and at least we're able to move forward in that relationship going forward. If you have any other questions about the FOP contract, feel free to ask me or the city.
And again, my understanding is that the dollars in the FOP contract turn out to be the same number of dollars over the period of time as was contemplated in the 5-year plan.
And that was a mistake by myself. The
Okay.
last year's payment is the same. So we end up paying the same amount in the last year, but we're paying more in those interim years.
Because
Because
of
of
the way
the
it's
catch
front-end
rate.
loaded.
So the salary that was anticipated to get to 2% a year.
Okay, but we still have the dollars to do that within the 5-year plan, is that correct?
Yes, it's about $1 million more in expenditures for personnel for police for next year than we anticipated in the 5-year plan. However, by the time you get to year 5 of the 5-year plan, it levels out because it's essentially a front-loaded contract. And we've revised our revenue projections up by closer to $2 million, so we definitely feel we have enough revenue to cover the added expenses. So it's balanced, and it conforms in the broad picture to the concept of the 5-year plan, but not in the short term.
And then my further understanding is part of the rationale for the front-end loading is to stop the attrition that we've been experiencing with the police going to other municipalities. So that should have, is that correct?
Absolutely. We couldn't, for every year that I've been mayor, we have been unable to get up to the fully budgeted complement of police officers that we have. Because no matter how many we've hired, we've lost that many in terms of people leaving the department. We had, I think it was 9 that left this past year that had under 5 years of experience. So when you have a class of 10 and you lose 9 or 11, you're going the wrong direction. We therefore thought it was imperative that we not adopt a traditional gradual scale model, but actually have more of an increase in the upfront. But we did it in a responsible way because after the initial upfront, it then stabilizes over the course of the next several years. So it gets them to a higher salary point quicker, but then it sort of stabilizes at that point over the course of the contract.
So even though you're estimating increases, there should also be some offsetting savings, although not as much as the increase, based on the fact that you're not retraining new people to go through that all the time.
That's true, as well as the fact that once they get this initial bump up, it doesn't then multiply at a standard percentage on a yearly basis. So you also don't see it increasing by large amounts over the course of each year. So you're not only, hopefully, you're not retraining and spending a lot of money losing people, but you're also, they're getting the bump up once, essentially, and then it stabilizes out from there.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions about the FOP agreement?
I have one question, and it also applies to the following agenda item with the intermunicipal agreement with Steelton. It has to do with the projections of the revenues and expenses. We did receive an analysis from Dan with Marathon. It was presented to City Council that projected out the AMBAC term sheet and the impact that would have on the budget over the next 5 years. And can we receive the same clarifications for these two items as well and how they're reflected in the revenues and expenses going forward, not just in the 2020 budget, but in the future years?
Sure.
Yeah.
And I'll note, for the purpose of the AMBAC presentation and presenting to council, those were projections done pretty much on the fly based on some pretty general growth rates. So I expect some further refining. I think it gave it a good picture and a good basis to make a decision on the AMBAC term sheet. I expect those projections to be refined going forward. They're kind of in draft form, but we can do the same for the other components of the budget.
Thank you.
And so further on the Stilton agreement, I think there was some opportunity to review the concept of the intermunicipal agreement with the Borough of Stilton, and I don't recollect that there were any particular questions or comments about the service or anything, but if you have any questions, this would be a great time to ask them. Otherwise, that was approved, and there's already a level of service that's being provided to Stilton, so this is really just
It was a 6-month pilot.
pilot program, so this is a continuation now of the pilot program. Will continue going forward. And then back to the original issue, which was the 2020 budget, both the operating and capital budget. I know that there were a couple of questions that were asked by members of the authority. We tried to get some clarification. I want to thank, he's not here today, but I want to thank Bruce for responding with information for you on a couple of different items that were picked out of the proposed budget, and I think that we got everything from Bruce that we had requested, some clarifications. More specifically, the issue that came up had to do with fund balances, and so we got a very nice fund balance report that Bruce put together to sort of explain where the funds were coming from and where they were going, and we found that, I think, useful to try to understand what the plan was for 2020. And if you have any other additional questions, obviously you heard it is going to necessitate a change in the 5-year, but if it's accepted without comment, then the budget itself becomes an amendment to the 5-year fiscal plan, and then, as the mayor said, they plan on the spring giving us an updated plan regardless. So we should, that's a living document that will continue to be updated throughout our charter. So I don't know if anybody has any other questions about the city operating or capital budgets. Okay, so if there are none, there is not a requirement to take action specifically to accept or reject. It's not that kind of action. If you don't choose to take any action, then the budget stands as submitted by the city to us. So no action is action. And as you know, you've received a letter, so that becomes and then if you want to, if the authority issues a statement or anything, you don't have to do that today. That will end up being our official response to the city on the submission of the 2020 budget. I don't know.
Well, we were told that we have 30 days.
30 days if you want to take action.
Right.
Otherwise, it just becomes accepted.
I mean, if we're ready to make a motion, given the review that we've been able to make.
With the caveats.
Right, no, and what I'd like to request, in the form of a motion, the acceptance of the 2020 operating and capital budget, the collective bargaining agreement with the FOP, the AMBAC rate sheet settlement, and the intergovernmental sanitation agreement with Stilton Borough, with two caveats. First, that the mayor's 5-year financial plan needs to be updated by April 30th, 2020 to be consistent with these documents. And second, that you authorize me to deliver a summary letter to the mayor with our observations regarding the budget and the other year-end actions.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion?
Yes. On the topic of discussion, I would feel more comfortable if I had seen the 5-year, the projections for the items, rather than just the 2020 numbers balancing. And if it would be possible to receive that information, and so we can verify that it still meets the requirements of a balanced budget in the future as well as 2020, I think I would feel more comfortable.
Okay.
So you could add
So
that
we-
as additional caveat to
Yeah.
your list. You have two, you could make that a third caveat as well, if you'd like. If the motion and the second would like to accept that as an amendment to the motion.
Mr. Mayor?
I would say that that's what we'll be doing in the spring to update the 5-year plan. So you would have that by April 30th. I don't think we're in a position to, I know it would be balanced. The question is how, I'm not sure we're quite prepared to estimate how much revenue we're going to bring in from the Steelton agreement. I know that the revenue will exceed the expenditures, but our plan was to get a year of receipts under our belt before we actually sort of made those projections, so we can be, I'd like to at least get the first quarter of next year in. I can tell you that right now, revenues exceed expenditures, so there's no issue with the agreement bringing the budget out of balance.
So,
Would you be
Yeah.
comfortable having that third caveat as something that would be provided to us by the end of the first quarter, but going ahead with this at this point? Or shortly after the end of the first quarter? And I'm asking.
Yeah, I think if, as an example, if the Steelton agreement, if the projections aren't available and it boils down to a statement that we've received from the mayor that the revenues, are exceeding the expenditures and we don't know exactly by how much, and that will be updated in April. I mean, I think that would satisfy it on that item. I don't see why we couldn't accept that. The point being that it would still result in a balanced budget.
It would seem to me that there's some advantage to not only the officials of city government knowing, but also the public knowing that we are in agreement with this budget, that we still have some questions as to future budgets, but given the uncertainty that everybody's been through in the past, seems to me that might be a calming influence on things, if you're comfortable with that.
And what about for the FOP collective bargaining agreement? Is that something
We have those
that?
projections, we could get those to you after the meeting. So
Yeah.
that's easy. And we could give you projections for Steelton, but it wouldn't be as accurate as I would want them to be. So we will definitely have them for the April 30th deadline.
That'd be great.
So are we back to the original
No
motion
motion,
without the amendment?
That's right. There is a motion on the floor with a second for the acceptance of the various items with the two caveats that Chairperson Carter originally detailed.
and then the understanding that we'll get this other information. Any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Okay,
There are the voices.
so they are all approved.
And thank you, Jeffrey, for all those explanations.
Yes,
I
thank you.
appreciate that. And last month, we had Mark and Bruce give us some information regarding the audit findings. And this month, we have Mark and Steve here. And I think Mark has declined to be the lead and has put Steve in the hot seat.
Well, I think it's for your benefit, because there are a lot of issues with our mainframe and our computer systems. And as you know, not to belabor the point, but they're aged, but I thought it would be important for you to meet Steve Gordon, who's the director of our IT. And in addition to him being able to answer any questions about the audit, but any other questions you have about the system itself, because we meet almost daily about the implementation of our migration away from our current mainframe. There's nothing that is more important to me and to Steve probably than to find solutions to some of the problems that we have. We've been creative in our ability to have workarounds, given the system and its limitations. But we've come to a point where we are now able to, because we're budgeting appropriately, and we can budget for this migration, that we can look at each department and make sure that we're going to make the right decisions with regard to the new systems that we're going to have in place. We've had discussions about migration, platforming around, all sorts of different things. But in the middle of that is Steve. He's going to be able to go over the audit findings, but I think that probably some of the things that are on the tips of your tongue and are about where we're going. And we've had those discussions, and I want Steve to be able to kind of proffer those to you, and then we'll answer any questions that you have afterwards. But this is, Steve, I don't know if they want you to sit there or you can sit there.
Well, today you're actually close enough. So if you're comfortable
I'm
there.
comfortable right
and
here, yes.
they can, yeah, listen.
So good afternoon. My name is Steve Warner, IT Director since July of 2017. Prior to that, I was in the private industry for about 33 years, so my entire background's in IT. And hard to believe, when I got here, I started doing things I did in my first job out of college, so with the mainframe. So I'm going to walk through the 6 findings. Obviously, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. I'll try to keep this at a high level and not go down into the weeds too far. So the first one was around program and system change control. And this deals specifically with the mainframe systems. So one of the things that we did is tried to establish a formal process for requesting changes to the mainframe. That way we have everything documented. We can provide that to the auditors every year when they ask. And because we are migrating away, we're trying to minimize the number of changes we make so that we don't spend the time doing things that are eventually going to go away. So we have started the migration. The first system is the police metro system. That should be migrated by second quarter of next year, so that's going pretty well. The other 3 systems are the personnel system. We're probably going to be migrating that by the end of 2020, which I'll touch on a little later. And then the other 2 systems are the city and the revenue systems, which is a bigger effort and will take a little bit longer to do, probably into 2021. Questions on the first one?
The migration is to a different type of architecture, so do you want to just tell us, because I'm sure you've settled on what the architecture will be, so.
Right, the first one, the system is called CODI, and it is an industry standard for the police departments throughout not only Pennsylvania but across the country. So the migration is actually taking 2 systems, InSync and the Metro, and that's InSync is scheduled to go live in January of next year. And then and it's client-server, internet-based architecture, so anybody can access it from anywhere that they have internet access. So it makes it easy for police officers as well as folks in the office to access.
Great. Cloud-based system.
The CODI system.
CODI
is
system.
cloud-based, yes.
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you.
Other questions on that?
Would you just provide a basic background for a person like me who's, I think, a decent computer user, but we won't push anything behind the box? How many computers are you talking about overall in state government? Is it in the range of 350, 400?
Actually, the mainframe is 1 computer. Correct. And then all the other systems that we have citywide are what we call virtualized, which means we can have 1 computer which runs multiple systems.
So how many virtualized units do we have?
8 physical servers that house about 25 systems. Everything basically is in 1 rack that runs the entire city,
And then
other than the mainframe.
do people just access that through a terminal?
Through their PC, a laptop. Some are on mobile devices. They can do it in the office. They can do it at home, depending if they've got the appropriate access to do so.
So the way they're accessing the mainframe now is through like a terminal emulation on their desktop PC.
Yes, right.
So they bring up a access point which goes into the mainframe for those programs that are still running on the mainframe.
Correct.
But then they still have the benefit of all the other stuff that sits on there. For example, we know we've talked a lot about office licenses, so clearly you're working in an office environment for word processing and spreadsheets. So they have Basically, it's a terminal emulation in a window that accesses the mainframe for those programs running on the mainframe through their PC.
Define the terminal emulation for
I
me.
mean, it's a, okay, you could do it. Yeah.
It's an application that sits on your PC, similar to Word, Excel, Outlook. So when you click on that, it brings up what looks like a green screen from an old terminal, but it accesses the mainframe.
And it's taking you back to the mainframe, not to the cloud.
Correct. It's going directly to the mainframe and nowhere else. So when we got the mainframe, everybody was connected through a dumb terminal, and they've all been replaced with PCs.
And how many PCs are they using in the offices? Let's leave out the laptops, but in the offices.
We have about 300 PCs
Okay.
citywide. That people, not everybody accesses the mainframe through those, but we have about 300 PCs that access various systems.
And does that include the units that I see in the police cars
Yes,
in that 300?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
And so you
That's
had,
helpful.
you had two different systems that you're merging into Cody. What were the failings? Like, were they talking to each other? Were they not updating quickly? What was the city experiencing as a result of trying to keep two things current and working together?
That was all before my time, but I think
Okay.
I could explain it. We were having lots of problems with the Metro system, so the police department decided to go with InSync. And when they did that, they basically purchased it, installed it, and went live. Nothing was converted into it. So
Oh,
the data in Metro is specifically in Metro. So if it's prior to a certain date in 2015, you have to go back to Metro to access it.
But-
Anything after that is in InSync.
But you can still access Metro?
Yes, they can still access Metro, yes.
And am I to assume that even once you make the conversion of the police system to Cody, you're still going to have the ability to go back and access old Metro
We
data?
will until we decide we're going to.
Until the day comes when you...
And there were other agencies that accessed Metro because
that
it was countywide.
Countywide was...
And so we've got to get their data off before we shut it down.
So Metro's, is that a legacy from like the 1970s?
1980s is when it started, yes. And it's written in COBOL, which was a 1970s technology that
Yeah,
still exists.
so when I was the borough manager in Middletown,
Yeah.
we used Metro through the city of Harrisburg.
And I was an intern in Lower
And-
Paxton Town.
And we left, when I was borough manager, we left Metro. Everybody left, eventually left Metro.
Right, we still have a few that access it, but just for historical data.
So
And
that's the
some have
place.
said they want it because they want to convert it into whatever other system they're going to as well. Good questions.
And the personnel system, the next one is also going to be a cloud-based?
That is cloud-based as well, yes.
Do you
That's
know, have you-
Paychex.
Paychex is going to be the...
And we already use them for cutting our payroll.
Sure.
So they have all the modules needed for personnel as well.
So that will track your applicants, your hiring, your termination, all of that in this Paychex?
The term we use is hiring through retiring.
Hiring through retiring,
So
cradle to grave
basically
in
your
effect.
entire
Yeah.
career
So
with the
that
city.
includes benefits management. and
That's
all that.
correct, yep.
And that's
All your
major.
leave allocations, yes.
Great.
And does that give you the capacity to set up separate personnel files for various reasons, like a medical personnel file, an investigative personnel file, a normal personnel file, an I-9 personnel file?
All those would be components within the system that only certain people who needed access would be able to get into. So
But
that's
they
all
would-
controlled into security levels.
Sorry, didn't mean to cut you
That's
out.
okay.
I have a bad tendency of
That's
doing
okay.
that. But each one of those would be separate, so the limitations on the medical file would be different than the people that can access the regular personnel file or the I-9 file.
Correct.
Thank you.
And so the last category that you brought up, Steve, was that the the city and the revenue was later on, that's sort of the a future phase. So should I assume that you have not yet selected vendors for those services at this point?
We haven't selected the final vendor. We've seen demos from 3 vendors. We have a lot more work to do to figure out what we want to do. And the big thing there is going to be the amount of historical data we need to convert. We want to convert 10 years worth of tax data, 10 years worth of utility data. All that needs to be factored into the process.
So when you say revenue, you really mean
Treasury.
financial management? It's
Well, just more or less treasury, not.
not GL, not accounts receivable,
No,
accounts
just
payable,
treasury.
just treasury.
Correct.
And that, there's no plans at this point to change that system?
Not at this point.
Okay.
Now, am I correct that the county at one point wanted to offer us computerized services?
That I do not know if they did or not.
Okay, so that, we sort of stopped you on the first page, and went off on a tangent, but that's good.
The next finding was on IT employee training. Since I've been here, we're trying to evaluate the skills of the staff we have, figure out what skills we need going forward. So towards the end of last year, we identified IBM, Cisco, Microsoft, and HP as the 4 products that we need to focus on getting training on. In addition to that, management development for succession planning for me, as well as GIS, which is a new position we created this year, which is fairly new to the city. Some people know about it, but we're trying to expand that and bring that under the IT umbrella as well. So those are the areas that we're focused on. A lot of that can be researched and done online at relatively low cost or no cost. Classroom training obviously costs more money, and then any internal knowledge transfer we can do, we're focusing on that as well. So trying to have as many people who know as much about the systems we have makes it easier if somebody's out or somebody leaves. We don't have that hole with that knowledge not being there.
Could you give us some sense of the size of the IT staff for the city?
Including me, we have a total of 6 right now with 1 consultant. We do have 1 open position that we are trying to fill, which we have a candidate that we've made an offer to, just waiting to hear back. So in total, including the consultant, it would be up to 8 if we had everybody on board. Other questions on that? Next finding is on disaster recovery. As you know, the city had some financial issues, and that was cut out of the budget in 2012. When I got here, I realized if we had an issue with our data center, the city would be down for months, potentially, or longer. So one of the things that we've done is we purchased a virtual tape server, which allows us to back up our data to a virtual machine and then replicate that to a data center in Iowa, so that if we do have a disaster, our data is replicated somewhere else. That would mean then we have to restore everything there to get connectivity and then allow people to access it. So we need to be able to do a disaster recovery exercise to be able to make sure that our data is complete and that we can access it at other locations.
Steve, is it being automatically sent on a regular
It's real-
basis
it's
to
real-time.
real time to the Iowa location?
Correct.
So it's mirroring what
Right.
what's in City Hall?
Right. In City Hall, we have a redundant storage area network, so
Okay.
it's replicating there as well. So if that, if the primary goes down, we can fail over to the secondary.
Is there a more analog system, like a tape backup also? or-
We do have tape backups, but our computer operator retired in June.
Okay.
So knowing that, we were preparing for this virtual server so that nobody had to come in 6 o'clock in the morning and put tapes into a machine to back everything up. This happens automatically. Nobody has to be here to do that, and it's pretty seamless.
So your feeling is now that if there was a disaster, the basement flooded, It wouldn't take you that long to get the city back online, bring the data back from Iowa and restore it.
From a mainframe
From a
standpoint,
mainframe,
correct, yeah. We'll get to that.
Oh, okay. I was being too optimistic.
And does the backup just documents, or does it back up documents and emails?
On the mainframe, it's strictly the data and the programs that interact with the data. The mainframe doesn't store documents or email. And email is actually in the cloud with Office 365, so that's not in our data center. But the documents, spreadsheets, Word documents, we do have them in our data center.
But there's no backup on the emails?
Microsoft does that for us. We don't have to do anything with that
Okay.
because it's in the cloud.
And then how much use is there at this point of texting for city purposes?
Very little. We have about 100 city employees that have a city-owned cell phone, and it's up to them if they want to do texting. Within IT, we don't do a lot of texting for important things because it's not backed up. It's not something that anybody can access, so we prefer to do email. That way it is documented.
Because more and more in my practice, I'm running into issues when people are doing things by text and not either having the apps that I'm told are available to, I'll call it back up, the text, or the screenshots of the text available.
Right, texting, instant messaging, those are things we don't encourage just because of the nature of it's not backed up, not recoverable easily.
Also a threshold issue now on open records.
Right, if you want to encourage your workforce in government to do that, you'd have to acquire some sort of software, not your regular software would come with your personal cell phone, and then make everybody use that so that there could be a backup. So for example, we use Google for Government where I am, and we use Hangouts, which is Google's texting application, and that's automatically stored in the cloud just like our emails. So there is a retention policy on our text as well. But that was a conscious decision because I'm going to sound old, right? Younger people like to text
Texting, yeah.
more than they like email is not
Passé.
is passé now.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to be able to have a system where we could do texting, but would get captured and stored and archived just like email. And so the only way to do that is to, in essence, acquire a license for some kind of texting communication program. And there are lots of them on the market that exist and are made by companies just for that purpose. So you can have employees texting and still capture the information.
Well, on the other side of that too is that it's starting to merge where clients and citizens want to communicate with government using methodologies as
Yeah,
well.
Yes.
yeah.
911
Yeah, we're not gonna-
systems are doing that
Social media.
actively. Another question, now you said you had PCs hung off the mainframe. Have you evaluated whether employees are storing separate databases or separate files in the PCs, and are they being backed up, and is there any common way to make sure those databases merge?
We encourage people not to store things on their PCs, but to put it on the network drive because that is backed up every day. If somebody would lose a hard drive on their PC, we have an image of all the applications on the machine, but we don't have a copy of anything that they would store there, so we don't encourage that.
Okay, and physical security for the systems? Both,
The systems are in a data center with prox card access like this, and only certain people have access, not everybody in the city. And we do have a buzzer at the door with a camera. If somebody's there to try and get in, we can see who it is before we actually let them in.
And detection and suppression systems?
We have a Halon system, which probably isn't the best, but that's what we have in there. We have a company, Yarnell, that monitors the temperature of the room. If it gets too hot, they'll call somebody. We also can arm the door when we leave each day. That way, if somebody would open it, that would trigger an alarm, which would trigger a phone call to us that says, somebody just entered your data center, after it was armed. So we arm it at night, disarm it during the day, then you can come and go as you need to.
Thank you. Steve, do you know what is the cost, since you hired the external data center entity?
To do the virtual tape server is about $59,000 a year.
It's an annual cost?
That's an annual cost, yes.
Regarding the written disaster recovery plan being updated, will that plan has to be changed next year?
That will have to be changed to incorporate that, as well as once we talk about
With every new
open
system,
servers.
you have to update it?
We'll have to update that, yes.
So do you think this finding can be, hopefully not show up on next year's?
I'm hoping that it does not show up, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to page 5, restoring the backups. We talked a lot about the mainframe virtual tape server. We are going to be doing the disaster recovery test in 2020. That is part of what we pay the $59,000 for, to do a test per year. A couple of weeks ago, we had a change that we needed to make to one of our programs. So we actually took the file from the virtual tape server and loaded it to a test system, and we verified that the data was accurate and complete and up to date. So we're pretty confident that that process will work. Page 6, policy for use of virtual private network or VPN. We incorporated this into our minimum access policy that we established at the end of 2017 that everybody reviewed. We do not give all city employees VPN access. It has to be requested by their manager through a system access form, which we keep on file and then grant the access based on what the manager is requesting. So there's probably, I'm going to guess, about 50 city employees that have VPN access. And if you don't have VPN access, you cannot access the city's network from anywhere other than inside the building at the PC.
Are those 50 employees telecommuting?
No, we don't have any employees
What's
that are
telecommuting?
like if they want to do things at night, on weekends, if there's something that they're working on, they have to go home, they want to do things at night, like I do sometimes, then I can do that. And my screen looks just like I'm sitting at my desk chair.
Steve, if the city adopted the policy in 2017, why was it a finding in their last report?
That's a good question. I'm not exactly sure why it was on the end of the 2018 one, but yes, because we had given it to them as part of what they had requested in the audit.
And people all have malware on there now that the
Yes, that is
city
part of the
requires
policy,
it.
that
Okay.
if you do have VPN access, you have to keep your antivirus software updated on your machine. We do the city-owned machines automatically, but your home PC also has to have it on. So yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure why it is.
And is there ability for you all to say, we have this policy, what sparked this finding? To ask the auditors to say, we can't prevent it next year if you don't tell us what caused you to find it this year?
Well, I have because this is the same thing that we had with regard to the housing finding. There were a number of them that had been resolved. So Bruce and I are going to talk to the auditors and make sure that we're all on the same page before they issue their report about the findings, because there were a number of them with regard to housing that were either resolved.
And it's possible you might have a new auditor by
that time.
By that time, so.
And the last one is carryover balances of vacation, converting that to holiday for firefighters only. So this is one where they changed the number of days during the agreement 2013. It's something that we never automated within the system itself, so somebody has to identify those firefighters and roll their vacation carryover to holiday rollover into the next year. So We basically do that manually every year, and knowing we're going to be migrating the personnel system to paychecks, it's not something we want to spend time working on to resolve for the limited number of employees that this would impact. Other questions?
I have 2 additional questions, if it's okay with the group. First, Steve, we had heard at our last meeting, Bruce was here, and he said that they'd fallen behind a little bit in the financial management software from doing updates, but that there was a plan to bring the system more up to date with current releases of that software.
Right.
Can you confirm that that's the plan, or has that happened, or is that going to happen?
That is still the plan. It has not happened yet. The latest I heard is we're looking at late first quarter of next year to migrate the current version to the new version.
Okay. Thank you. I know that's something we were concerned about. We want to make sure that the financial management software, at least, if nothing else, is operating at the latest version available for the provider. And then the second thing is, we all read in the newspaper that the big thing that cities have to worry about these days are ransomware attacks. There are cities, in fact, right now, the city of New Orleans is under a ransomware attack, and now as those attacks work, they find an exploit and they enter a system and they encrypt all the city's files, and then they ask for money. And of course, the famous story is the city of Atlanta. I believe the number was $1 million in ransom to unlock their files. They decided, no, we're not going to pay the ransom, and then it cost them $10 million to replace all the computers that were locked up. So, I mean, that's great, but we obviously don't want to find the city of Harrisburg fighting off a ransomware attack. Can you tell us whether you guys have, without being too specific, have you guys looked into that as a possible vulnerability, and have you taken steps to try to protect the city from ransomware attacks?
Right. Great question. It is something that any entity, any organization can't prevent 100%. All it takes is one person to do one thing wrong and you've got problems. So we have a couple of different things we're doing. We belong to an organization called ICA, which is was created and funded by the Department of Homeland Security. They monitor threats every day. We get updates from them once a week or more periodically if they find something that we should be aware of. We also partnered with a company called KnowBe4, which is a cybersecurity training company. We're able to push training to our employees. We do phishing exercises once a month to kind of alert people. We have the ability for them, if they get an email they're not sure of, they can push a phish alert button within their email and it sends it to us. We can evaluate it and figure out if it is something we need to be concerned about. So,
excellent.
And we also purchased new servers and storage area network a little over a year ago. We have a Cisco server farm and then a Nimble storage area network, which does periodic snapshots. Mm-hmm. So as long as we get good backups every day and we've got them snapshots, we should have the ability to recover from anything if it would happen without having to pay the ransom. Yes. So we're on top of it every day. We look at reports, things within our Cisco environment that kind of alerts us as to what may be going on.
Thanks, Steve. That's great. Thank you, everybody. Those are my questions.
Any other questions? Anything else, Mark or Steve, that you think? Sort of the interview questions. Is there any question we should have asked that we didn't ask? Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Okay. Well, the good news is that we're almost
done.
It's probably trying to tell us that we need to end. I think the next thing on our agenda is if there are any public comments. Is that right? I don't have my glasses on.
Yeah, that's it.
Yes. Public comment, public questions, 10 minutes, or however long his battery goes. Hearing no questions.
Okay.
Like a motion to adjourn. We are going to go into executive session on the advice of General Counsel.
Yes.
Motion to adjourn to executive session.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
All right.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
You're all kicked out.